Good morning, everyone that's joined us this morning. My name is Erica Banta. I'm the Talent Management Director in the Office of Human Resources, and I'm a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Facilitators Group here at Ohio State. I'm honored to be hosting our discussion this morning, talking about the best practices and strategies for hosting an effective dialogue. Now, this is part two of the discussion, and recordings of both of these webinars will be available soon. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. All of our participants are on mute. So please use the Q&A box to ask any questions you might have along the way, which is being manned by two of my colleagues, Lori and Leo. So thank you both for that. We'll have some time a little later to get to some of those questions live with our panelists. So I'm joined this morning by three amazing people who are going to share some of their experiences around having those intentional conversations. And I believe they'll do a much better job than I will telling us a little bit about themselves. So welcome. Angela, would you like to start?
Absolutely. Thank you, Erica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Alston. I am an assistant professor of nursing in the College of Nursing. I also have the honor of serving as their Chief Diversity Officer. I've been with Ohio State now for just a little over 1 year and really happy to participate in this panel today. One thing I'll also mention that I sometimes forget to mention when I do my introductions, I'm also a practicing nurse practitioner as well.
Awesome. Welcome, Angela. I'm so happy to have you here this morning. Christina.
Thank you, Erica. My name is Christina Cunningham. I am an Employee and Labor Relations Advisor, so I'm part of the COE within the Office of Human Resources and help to support a number of areas around the university for Employee and Labor Relations support. And I've been at the university for a little bit over 6 years.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. My name is Norman Jones, and I've just finished 16 years at Ohio State. I'm a professor of English, and I serve as the Dean and Director of the Mansfield campus, one of our regional campuses.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Thank you all. I really want to get into some, real-time tactics and strategies that our listeners can take with them and use right away. So I'm just going to jump in with a question. When you think about hosting a dialogue, what would be some goals for a listening session? Maybe what would be some good ground rules? I'd like to distinguish that not necessarily the preparation before, but maybe something that could be done in real time with your participants. I'll just open that up to the group, whoever would like to start.
One of the things I think is really important as you're beginning to have the conversation is setting the expectations. You want to really be clear on what the objectives are so that those who are participating have an understanding of what they can get from the conversation and how things are perhaps going to go for the day. So I think that's really important to establish that from the start. I also think just clearly establishing whatever the ground rules may be. So Erica, kind of like you started off with the housekeeping rules and just letting everyone know what to expect. But I think it's important too, if you're having the opportunity for people to go back and forth with conversation, to state the obvious, that we're expecting respectful conversation, that opinions may be different, but they are still welcomed and appreciated, because we want everyone who is participating to feel as though they have an opportunity to share their voice and share their perspective.
Yeah, that's great. I like the being clear on objectives, just that level setting before we start. Norman, what have been your experiences with setting that up?
Well, I wonder, maybe it'd be helpful if I used an example to get very specific. I have led a series of conversations about gender parity in faculty service loads on the Mansfield campus. And I just called up some of the ground rules that I set in one of those conversations. So if I can run through briefly, we after welcoming everybody, we said explicitly, here are the ground rules we'd like to follow, as Angela recommended. And we said, first, let's avoid generalizations that women prefer this or men do this. Like, let's try to talk in more specifics than that. I said, let's please avoid calling out specific people in the room. We're talking about ideas and issues. We're not trying to have personalities involved and be singling out folks. And along the goals line, when you're talking about a really thorny issue, some people, there's that lingo of the wicked problems that are really hard to solve. Those are the ones you want to be digging into. Our goal can be large, can be how do we move forward on achieving better gender parity in faculty service loads, for instance. But that's not something that we're likely to accomplish in one meeting. So I find it helpful to state that larger goal, but then go for the simpler goal, the more immediate goal, which in my example was to listen to each other's voices and try not to be defensive, but empathetic and hear what the concerns are. That's what we're going to accomplish in an hour, in 90 minutes. So your goal wouldn't have to be that precisely, but I think it's important to think about, if you're going for a really tough set of issues, what can you realistically accomplish, that's a step toward that, and make it clear to everybody what you're going to accomplish.
Yeah, I like that. And it sounds like that is repeatable, that's something that you use every time, which I think is really handy to have in our toolkit. Christina, what have been your experiences? I think you work more one-on-one with people, but when you're helping groups, what has been your experience?
Yeah, so in addition to what Angela and Norman already outlined, one thing that's really important for me is that everybody's an active listener, but everybody's also present, because, we all have our cell phones, and, they're kind of our security blankets at this point, where you don't go anywhere without them. And it's really easy to get distracted, and there's always a lot going on, and there's, so much going on at the university right now. But really being present in those conversations and in those, your colleagues, your peers, your subordinates, whoever that might be, being an active listener. I also encourage people in these spaces to be a little bit vulnerable. Vulnerability is viewed as a weakness by some people, but I think especially in these spaces and in these dialogues, really being open and honest about how you're feeling or what you're going through, and understanding that it is kind of the safe space to be having these conversations, so we can continue to move the conversation forward and make sure that we are, hearing each other, and that we are, understanding where other viewpoints, even if we may have a different viewpoint or a different background, because that is really going to drive any momentum that we may have as an institution to keep moving forward.
Yeah, wow. What a great way to kick off our conversation this morning. So that's a great segue into, so let's say we do prep, and we've set these ground rules, we've established our goals, we've asked people to be vulnerable. So I have an interesting question along those lines. Do you feel that it's appropriate to require staff to partake in a dialogue? In other words, if a manager makes this part, I love, Norman, that you called it thorny issue, makes thorny issues part of a team meeting agenda, how would you handle staff members who didn't want to participate?
I'll jump in there. I do not require people to speak up. I mean, if we're doing a larger kind of event where we might have breakouts, which I've done too, into small groups, then that's a way to make it better for people to communicate. Other ways to get participation, or to suggest, people to have done the Post-it, you write on a Post-it note, stick it up on the wall. But if it's a group discussion, some people just aren't very comfortable. They may feel that they have retaliation fears in the workplace. And of course, we try to protect against that. But even if I feel we don't really have that concern, someone may feel that that's a concern, and that's an issue to me, right? We want to respect those feelings. Sometimes it's not easy to determine. And then some people may feel, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, kind of trigger issues or comments, that might really feel so close to someone that they feel they'll get very emotional and maybe don't feel comfortable doing that. I agree with Christina that I love the idea of being vulnerable, and if people get emotional, that's great, but not everyone wants to do that. They may feel compromised in some ways, and I don't want to force anybody to put themselves in that position. Oh, but I should add that when I feel it's really important to get everybody's input, I've sometimes done anonymous Qualtrics or surveys beforehand so that I make sure that I've got feedback from anyone who wants to give feedback, or we can always talk about follow-ups, get in touch with me if you have comments you haven't shared here, and that kind of thing.
That's great. That's great.
Erica, I would agree with Norman in terms of not requiring people to speak if they're not comfortable with speaking, because I think what you end up doing in situations like that is creating uncomfortable situations for everyone. And so you really want people to be just as empowered to speak up as people are just as empowered to listen to the conversation. And to Norman's point, I think there are other ways in which we can elicit feedback from those who may not feel as comfortable with speaking up in larger crowds, and still having their voice heard, but perhaps in a way that is more comfortable to them. So I think anytime you're hosting any sort of discussions, you do want to exercise that level of flexibility. And then again, coming back to the ground rules. Is it the expectation that everyone will participate in this group activity? Were people aware of that information ahead of time? Did they have time to prepare and collect their thoughts? And so all of those things need to be considered when you're looking at hosting.
Mm. Yeah, that very good points. Very good. Christina, so from an employee and labor relations perspective, I'm a manager. Can I require my staff to attend this meeting about this thorny topic?
So, like Norman and Angela have said, in terms of requirement, that feels like a very heavy word. I think that you can encourage, people to be part of the town halls that are happening on diversity and inclusion initiatives around the university and have those open conversations within the units themselves. But, requiring somebody to the point that Norman made earlier of potentially triggering somebody, or, they feel a certain way and perhaps they just don't feel comfortable. I wouldn't want us to put ourselves in a situation where our employees feel uncomfortable or feel like they're being forced to engage in conversations of this nature, especially, when we're talking about conversations and discussions specific to race and diversity that are going on right now. We want to be really thoughtful of boundaries and what makes someone feel comfortable and what makes someone feel uncomfortable. Now, if we're talking about, daily conversations that are happening in the workplace related to work, that's a different conversation. And that's something that certainly your employee and labor relations team would be able to help you with from a management perspective.
Great, thank you. So put on our facilitator hat, and I want to ask, how do you know? So we've established the ground rules. We've encouraged people to participate, and so now when you're hosting a dialogue intentionally, how do you know when it's a good time to pivot? How do we take a point that's made and turn the dialogue to a new direction? That can feel sometimes awkward, especially if you have things that you want to get to and you have a limited amount of time. So what are some strategies that you use to pivot the conversation?
So, one strategy that I use, especially if we're continually hearing the same types of feedback or the same type of situation and scenario over and over from multiple participants, acknowledging that it sounds as if we've continued to hear those thoughts or that feedback, and, even acknowledging that we have potentially limited time, or if someone had brought up a point, making a note of that and saying, I want to go back to the point that Angela made a few minutes ago, because I feel like that's a really good direction for us to go down and to explore that. So even acknowledging the fact that you are going to pivot and we are going to go down a different direction or down a different path on a different topic, and just being really transparent, I think that's something from my perspective where I acknowledge that conversations might be difficult. I acknowledge that, these are tough conversations to be having. And I think by being a facilitator and exhibiting that vulnerability that I mentioned at the very beginning, I think that helps to build the trust with the participants, and then also helps to set the stage that, you want to be a participant as well in the conversations.
That's great. Angela, do you have anything that you would add to that?
Sure. I think I agree with Christina, and I think time is definitely something that I use to help me figure out how the conversation may continue to go. If I have more time, then I will allow people to continue to have the conversations and be able to voice their thoughts and opinions. If there's less time that's available, and I don't think that we're going to be able to meet all of the objectives that we've outlined for the day, then it will be time to pivot and let individuals know this is great discussion, but for the sake of time, we have other topics that we do want to, be able to get to, and so we're going to move along. And so that way people understand what you're doing and why you're stopping the conversation. And most people are respectful and understanding of that. Mm-hmm. But I would completely agree with Christina's thoughts, and just have that as an extra thought just to add. And I think it depends on the depth of the comment. So to Christina's point, if there's something that I think we can further unpackage through discussion and time permits, coming back to that comment and say, let's talk a little bit more about that and see if we can get more conversation to come out, especially if it's a strong comment that's going to really help us to reinforce the points that we're trying to make for the day.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. One of the, as a facilitator myself, one of the strategies that I often use, I keep looking over, is I take notes as we talk. Just so, I might just jot down one word that I want to come back to or remember. And I think that's one of my strategies anyway that I use. Norman, is there anything else that you might like to add to this one?
I really love everything that Angela and Christina said. And I also love what you just said, Erica, about taking notes. If I'm meeting with a small team that works together and we're trying to brainstorm a solution to a specific problem, then it might be appropriate for the leader of that meeting, if it's me or whoever, to be more directive and to move through, okay, we've got this idea, let's move here. But in what I think we're talking about here, it tends to be more about culture, workplace culture, some thornier kind of issues. And in that case, I think it's really important that everyone feel heard. And if a comment is getting repeated, it's easy to go to a kind of negative place and say, this might be because somebody just is talking too much. They're not aware of the setting. This has already been said. You can go that place in your head, but it's more constructive to think, okay, this is important to people. And maybe somebody's saying this because they don't feel it's been heard. So I feel it's important to repeat back to folks what I'm hearing so that they know I've heard it in language that they say, yeah, that's what I meant. And Erica, following up on your point about taking notes, I'll often tell folks I'm taking notes, about what I'm hearing because we want to do something with this. We've all been in those meetings where we think, is this just another meeting where nothing will happen? And especially around issues of racial justice or gender or those thorny kind of problems, people often say to me, look, we've talked about this before. Is anything going to happen? Is this just a tokenistic kind of event? And one of the ways that I need to I feel incumbent on me as the organizer and host to reassure folks is to say, I'm taking notes, here's what's important. And then if something has been said a lot, I can say, hey, I've heard this a bunch, so this is really important. I've got it in my notes. And if I'm going to pivot, then I'll try to find what do we have in common? What's a common theme or value that's been expressed that can help move us toward the next issue or question or point, so that we're at least building on the conversation. Because if I'm too controlling, that's going to turn a lot of people off, and it's going to short circuit the whole idea if the idea is to like move forward as a community.
Yeah, I agree with all of these points. This is just great, and I really hope that our attendees, I know myself, I'm taking some good notes just to better myself as a host and a facilitator. But these are strategies that you don't come naturally sometimes. Trying on new behaviors can sometimes feel uncomfortable. So I again just want to thank you all for sharing your experiences around this. So,
Erica, if I may, I did want to add one additional comment that I think everyone will appreciate. In the era of Zoom and having so many of our conversations occurring this way, it can be increasingly challenging to really facilitate, because as everyone doesn't always have cameras on, and so it's not easy to read body language or see if someone is looking perplexed and if maybe you need to expand a little bit more. So those are challenges that I think we all have to just be prepared for as we are hosting dialogues in a virtual way, which is something that is new perhaps to many of us.
it's such a good point. And even being comfortable with the technology beforehand can be really helpful. So yeah, we're in the age of, is your camera on? Are you muted? We can't hear you. And that can be distracting from the meat of the conversation for sure. So thank you for mentioning that, Angela. So a very tactical sort of granular question. What is, in your experience, what's one icebreaker or opening question that you've used to set the stage for these conversations? Or perhaps a favorite?
I'm going to be honest and say I honestly don't have something that I always start off with in terms of an icebreaker. I think it really depends on the audience that I'm speaking to, how much time I actually have, how appropriate perhaps are more fun activities versus, the seriousness of the meetings perhaps. And so I think there is not necessarily a one size fit all that I found thus far in my career. Now, I haven't been doing this for 30 years, so ask me this in 5 years and I may say something completely different than what I'm saying today. But right now, I think it just depends on the purpose of the meeting, who's involved in the discussion. If it's more of a team meeting and it's more personable, then I do think icebreakers are a great opportunity to get people talking, things that are not as heavy, to just get people to speak. But I think that might not necessarily be appropriate for other settings, depending on the size of the group and the goals that you're trying to accomplish in a limited amount of time. So I don't have a particular thing that I always use. And that has worked okay for me thus far.
And I would agree exactly with what Angela said, knowing the audience, knowing the purpose of the meeting, what the expectations are. Is it going to be a heavier topic where, talking about what you did over the weekend, or talking about, what's your one regret from quarantine, where that might not be appropriate. But I think, kind of going along with the ground rules and setting the stage that we talked about earlier in the conversation, even kicking off the meeting and acknowledging like this could be a difficult conversation. If you need to take a minute, take a minute. If you don't want to participate, you're not required to participate, but you're encouraged. We want to hear from everybody. Even setting that stage, and it's not an icebreaker, but that kind of those ground rules and housekeeping, going back to earlier in our conversation, I think is really helpful. But, we actually have a weekly team meeting where we have like a question of the week. And, we talk a lot about if you weren't in HR, what job would you have? Or what's your one regret from quarantine? What's your quarantine nickname? So we've tried to build that, but those are more team related meetings versus having these heavier conversations and facilitating those types of conversations.
I am, Angela, I'm so glad you started us off on this note, because I was thinking about this question and I do not have an icebreaker that I use. I don't have any thought, well, am I deficient? But I'm like you. It so depends on the context. And as we've been talking, as I've been listening to both of you, Angela and Christina, I've been realizing when I facilitate tough conversations, it's never with a group of people that I haven't met before. And so I don't have any experience doing that. That might require a different approach as an icebreaker, and I don't have that experience. But so I'm always working on a campus where I've worked for a while, and as you say, if it's a heavy conversation, we know we've got to get down to business. Sometimes we just jump down to business. If I'm going to use an icebreaker, it's very much as the two of you described. I do the same thing when I was associate dean. I got a lot of complaints. Part of my job was to take complaints from students about faculty, and I always found it really important to establish some kind of relationship before we jumped right into the complaint, unless the student was just really eager, desiring to jump into the complaint. But we try to, how's your day going? How are, what? So I'll do that with colleagues if we're meeting in a group, right? How's everybody dealing with the quarantine, whatever it is, but I already have a relationship with them. And in part, I think that's useful to remind everybody that we have a relationship. In my role, one of the strange things is that I've worked my way up through a lot of different positions on my campus. And now in the leadership position on the campus, my words are different for folks. They tend to carry a different weight. So I can't ignore that. I can't dodge that. But I can remind them that we're all in this together. I've known folks for a long time, and that's a nice way to start off for me. But again, it probably wouldn't work as well for somebody walking into a group where you're hosting folks that you haven't met before. And I recognize that's something I have less experience with.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned, hosting a conversation with people that we've not met before. And that can happen. I think that's happening more and more in our age of Zoom right now, as we're working remote. So I'm going to ask a question that we get asked often. That's somewhat of a difficult one, but what do you do if the conversation becomes insulting or uncivil, or if a person is being blatantly disrespectful of others? What are some of your strategies to deal with that?
So for me, in my role as an employee and labor relations advisor, we have tough conversations all of the time. We deal with a lot of people who, and it sounds like Norman's had this experience, are filing complaints or making complaints. And, when a conversation starts to go south and it starts to become just disrespectful or even incivil, really pausing in that moment. And if you've set those ground rules of having a respectful conversation, even though opinions might differ, viewpoints might differ, experiences might differ, really anchoring back to, we do want to hear from everybody and we do want to hear everybody's viewpoint or what they've experienced. But when you are expressing that, everybody needs to be respectful. Like, this is a respectful conversation. This is a conversation that needs to be productive. And if we are starting to go down a path where it is disrespectful or, starts to become insulting, it also becomes an unproductive conversation. Because You start to have people who get defensive, or they check out, they're not engaging, they're not paying attention. So then you really lose the productivity and the purpose of even starting to have these conversations. And if it gets to a point where you just have to stop the conversation, you just stop, you say, we're going to stop this conversation and we'll pick it back up at a later date, and then have a conversation with the person who is engaging in that behavior offline of, you know, this is the behavior that I saw from you, and this was not respectful. Even if you didn't view yourself this way, this is how you are being perceived by others in the conversation, including myself, if that's something that you experienced as well.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Erica. No, go. You go.
No, I was just going to make a comment that I love the strategy perhaps of saying that we're going to lose the productivity of this conversation with these distractions, because I think everyone inherently wants to have a productive, good conversation. So just bringing that up, I think, is a great strategy. Angela.
Thank you, Erica. Christina, thank you for your comments there. I agree with you. I would just like to add that as the facilitator of a group, you have to also keep in mind that you have a responsibility to help to ensure, just as she said, that the conversation continues to be productive and that you continue to meet the goals that you have. And so you do have to address it, as uncomfortable as it may be. And so I have had conversations where I've had to say, you know, perhaps we should take this conversation offline and talk more about that so that we can continue on with the objectives of the meeting. And so it's how you say it, I think, but people are watching that, and people have an expectation that you're going to facilitate a productive meeting for them. And if that means that you have to single someone out and offer to have a conversation with them separately so that the masses of the group can still continue on, then I think you have a responsibility to do that as the facilitator, and recognize that your heart rate might go up a little bit, your palms might be sweaty a little bit, you know, and that's all just part of the process. But it is an expectation when you're facilitating that you do always need to be prepared for opinions that are going to be different or that may potentially become hostile.
I love that answer, Angela and Christina. I think you're right. I mean, you're responsible for that conversation, and if it has to stop, then it has to stop, right? So even if you say, okay, this is not productive, we're going to stop. The only thing I would add is that, and this partly comes from my experience in the classroom, if somebody's being disrespectful in a way that is disruptive, I try to avoid a face-off where I'm saying to one person, hey, you're doing X, Y, and Z specific things that are really bad here. You need to stop. Then I've called that person out in front of the group, and the person almost has to get into a fight or flight response. And so you flip a coin, and there's a chance that person will come back at you. Or another way to put it is, I don't want to be personally attacking if that's a value I've already established as something I don't want anyone else to do, you know, like, so as Angela says, like, my heart rate might go up, my palms might get sweaty, but I've got to maintain that. I've got to keep modeling the behavior that I want to set for the room. So I'm not going to be attacking people personally. So what I'll do if somebody is going in that direction is take a pause, to use Christina's language, like, let's stop here for a second, you know, remind us of the ground rules, go back to basic principles. I don't have to call out a specific person for, hey, you said this and that's not cool. But I just remind us all of the basic principles. And if I feel we can continue, right, like, let's take a beat, let's move on, then we can continue. But if you have to stop the conversation and continue at another time, I think that's better than risking something where everyone talks about for the next 6 months. Whoa, did you hear how badly that thing went? And everyone feels even worse about it than before. So I really appreciate what Christina and Angela said.
Yeah, I do too. And what you just said, you know, all the preparation and good intent in the world Sometimes when we're talking with other humans, we can't predict, what they're going to say. So that I love that you model the behavior that you want others to see. So what a great conversation. So we're going through the life cycle, right, of these conversations, and so we've prepared, we've set ground rules. We've discussed some things during and some strategies that we can use. And so my last question before we get to some Q&A. So now, how do we foster a continuation of that safe or brave space after the dialogue, after the meeting? I think this is especially true if we're in regular contact with others that were in the same meeting or were in the same discussion. So I think part of feeling safe during the dialogue is knowing what's going to happen afterward. So I'll ask, how do you foster that continuation of the feeling safe even after the conversation is over? And Angela, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So again, I think it depends on, what the purpose is. If it's a one and done type of conversation that you're going to have, then you may not have the opportunity to necessarily directly influence how conversations go afterwards, but you can charge your participants with continuing to utilize some of the skills or tactics that they may have learned in that session and use that as they go about their day-to-day. And so I think charging individuals to just continue on with the conversations, even though you may not be involved, is appropriate. If it's in a setting and these are people that you see regularly and there's opportunities for continuations of the conversations, I think you can still encourage people to continue to have those conversations one-to-one, but letting them know the next time that there's going to be another session that's going to focus on this, or we're going to talk more about this, just sets that expectation. So again, I think it depends, but no matter what, I think encouraging people to not let the conversation die at the end of the Zoom call or the presentation that you're having. You want people to continue to have that dialogue, continue to self-reflect, continue to learn, continue to do things that are going to make them more empowered, to continue to be prepared to participate in these discussions that are honestly, Erica, not going to go away anytime soon. So I think we all have a due diligence in terms of really needing to be prepared for these conversations, because they are going to happen in our workplace setting and perhaps in other organizations that we affiliate or participate with.
Yep, you're absolutely right, Angela. Thank you. Thank you for that. Norman.
I love everything Angela said. And again, it may depend on one's role a little bit, but in my role as a leader of a group that I'm continuing to work with, I think it's really important not only that I have a plan to continue the conversation, but that I communicate about that. So there's a saying that I really love, that if you're not sick of saying it, you're not saying it enough. If this is really an important issue to me, then I've got to be saying it repeatedly, and I've got to remind the folks that I serve that we've done this, and this, and we're moving to that, because my job is the big picture on my campus. My job is little pictures too, but I'm especially responsible for the big picture. A lot of the folks I serve are not responsible for the big picture, right? They're working on one aspect. I can't assume that they're going to remember the kind of big picture steps that our campus has been taking. It's my job to tell that story and to remind everybody of where we are, and not just when we have another meeting, but in email communications and other opportunities, so that people are reminded that their work is important. I mean, to go to a slightly different kind of example, strategic planning. We all have been engaged in strategic planning. We all have probably had those experiences where we think, oh, we slog through these conversations, some of which involve, these kinds of thorny issues, and then we never see it again. Well, hopefully the folks in the leadership roles are using that strategic plan regularly. I feel like if I'm in the leadership role, it's incumbent on me to remind people that I'm using it. Hey, as we've talked about, and this is how we're building here, we're aiming for that goal. But Angela's right. These things aren't aren't going to be suddenly solved. The conversations aren't going to go away. And so I really think it's important for leaders to remind people about that narrative that we're in, that we're still working on that. Because otherwise, you can't expect everyone to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot, everyone has a lot on their plate, and those reminders, that steady flow of the greater good and what we're trying to accomplish is really important. So yes, thank you. Christina, any final thoughts on this topic?
I mean, Angela summed it up perfectly in terms of, depending on, is it a one and done training or conversation? Is it a team meeting where you're going to continue to have these conversations with your team? If it is going to be an ongoing conversation, really holding yourself accountable as the facilitator to be invested in continuing to have those conversations. What are the action items that you're walking away from? As a facilitator, if you notice that someone was very impacted during the conversation, following up with that person separately or independently, or if you happen to notice that someone didn't participate at all, maybe just doing a reach out to that person to say, hey, I noticed that you weren't really actively participating, just want to check in on you. Do you need anything? Again, not forcing you to participate in the conversation, but just want to make sure that you feel supported. And if there are concerns or issues that you want to talk about that you didn't want to talk about in front of the entire group, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it, because I want you to feel just as supported, even if you didn't want to have that conversation or bring something up in front of everybody else. But really just continuing to have the conversations and, not letting the conversations die, because we're moving on to the next thing. Because as both Angela and Norman said, we're going to have to continue to have these conversations, and we should continue to be having these conversations because it's very important and it's very critical, not only to us as facilitators and leaders, but also to the greater community.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I like to say is everyone leads from where they sit. So you don't have to be a facilitator or a leader to intentionally have dialogues with your colleagues and your friends outside of work. So I'm really appreciative of the strategies and the real world things that we're talking about right now. So we're right about at the time when I would love to know if we have some questions from our participants. So I have two of my colleagues on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Facilitators Group, Lori Maynell and Leo Taylor. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have a question. Hi, this is Leo. We have a question for Christina about getting people to be active listeners. Do you specifically state something about requiring or requesting people to be active listeners and avoid distractions at the beginning of the meeting? This person has been in several meetings where people are constantly looking at their phones, and I've never heard anyone call them out or address it at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, so that is just a personal pet peeve of mine. If I'm talking to somebody and they're looking at their phone, I've actually yelled at relatives where I'll say, am I not important enough that you can't put your phone down for a few minutes? So of course, setting that at the front of the meeting of, this is really important. We would like everybody to be an active participant and an active listener. Meaning, please don't be checking your email. Please don't be checking text messages. We're only together for 45 minutes. We're only together for an hour, and this is a really important conversation. But understand, if an emergency comes up, we'll be understanding of that. And then if you see someone during that conversation where they aren't being an active participant, where afterwards talking to them about that, and I noticed that you were on your phone, or I noticed that you were checking your phone quite a bit. Going forward, I would really appreciate it. We're asking that everybody's an active participant. So certainly if I would be checking my phone, I would ask that some of the participants say to me, Christina, we're all active listeners here. Like, please put your phone down. And really just opening that up because of how important these conversations are. I think it's important to set that at the beginning.
If I may just jump in, I would add, if it's the phone issue that's a tough one. If there's crosstalk, I personalize my issue with that. I'll say, hey, I'm so sorry, but could you guys hold off on that? I can't follow what's being said over here. Which is true. I don't know if it's just my powers of concentration or whatever, but it is true. I get distracted, and I assume other people do, but I just take ownership for that myself.
Okay, are we ready for the next question?
Sure.
Okay, this is Lori, and the question was about people who are being disruptive and disrespectful in meetings. And the question is, would you ever block a participant on Zoom who is being disruptive in that way?
I honestly haven't had it happen, and I honestly haven't thought about it even as an option. So I'm pondering the idea of it. I think that it would allow you to continue to have your conversation with everyone else, but the repercussions of that for the person that you blocked and didn't set that as a standard from the beginning, that, you know, you may exercise the right to do this, seems like you would have just more hard conversations afterwards in terms of addressing that. So I would have to give that a little bit more thought. Christina, Norman, I'm not sure if you have something more to add.
The only time I've had to do that is early in the quarantine, right? The second half of spring semester. I was running a Zoom session with students, and this is different than with colleagues, and we got ferociously Zoom bombed, and it was ugly. It got really ugly, and so I said very quickly, "Hey, these aren't appropriate comments. I'm going to block you," and they continued. So then I removed people. Eventually, I just had to shut down that conversation, and I could imagine doing that with students, but I'm with Angela. I think to do that with colleagues. In the case, this was early. We didn't know as much about Zoom bombing, and I didn't have the protections up that I should have had. So I'm not even sure if they were students on my campus or OSU students. They could have been anybody. You know, we made some mistakes in hindsight about how we did that. So that was a different situation, I think. But I don't think I would do that with colleagues. I would sooner stop the whole meeting and say, hey, let's pick up with this later, and then go talk to that person individually.
Yeah, I echo exactly what Angela and Norman said. I haven't blocked anybody on Zoom. I guess I didn't even realize you could do that. Being fully transparent that I'm technologically challenged, but I do think exactly what Norman said of, you know, setting that at the beginning of if it starts to become disrespectful, perhaps I'll need to block you, or, you know, even using the chat function with that person specifically and maybe sending them an IM or a chat to let them know that the tone or the tenor of the conversation from them or how they're behaving and interacting with the rest of the group, it seems to be insulting, disrespectful, inappropriate, and to please modify your behavior, or, you know, I may be required to block you, or we will just stop the meeting. So, you know, kind of hooking back into what Angela and Norman said, but even going a step further to even chat or I am that person to try to stop it in the moment at least. And then if it continues, either potentially blocking or just stopping the meeting.
Yeah, I think those are all really great comments. I echo all of them. You know, I try when I host meetings virtually, I try as best that I can to make sure it feels like we're in the room together. And I know that when we did share physical space, I wouldn't have had the luxury to block someone because they'd be sitting right in front of me. So that's when we, you know, strengthen those chops as leaders and facilitators. Referring back to, you know, Angela, I believe it was you that said sometimes our bodies do things that make our heart race and our palms sweaty when we have to have difficult conversations, and we can't control those, but that's all part of this. And so I guess for me, if I wouldn't toss someone out of a room, I would use some of the strategies that you have talked about, you know, sending a private message or just shutting down altogether, because those conversations after someone just gets randomly blocked would be much more tough than dealing with them in the moment. So thank you. What other questions do we have?
We have 5 more questions. So related to the icebreaker question, or getting the conversation started, this person has often heard some say that they feel it's hard to dive in a forum or town hall setting when you don't have relationships with many of the people present, thinking of very large units, for example. This person says, I understand icebreakers may not be appropriate, but do you have thoughts on how you get the conversation to flow or how to help create a common ground when the participants in the space may not see or hear familiar voices that may help them to feel more comfortable?
I think having an advanced agenda sent out in those situations can be incredibly helpful, and asking people to think about questions that they might want to ask. That gives them the opportunity to know who's going to be there, what they're planning to potentially talk about based upon the topics, and then you can create those questions that you've had time to think about in advance. Because sometimes it's hard to think of questions on the spot when a meeting is so short. And oftentimes, I'll find myself, sometimes I'll get off the call, it's like, I should have asked that, but I didn't think about it in the moment because I hadn't had time maybe to prepare. So I think anything that can be done to help participants prepare is going to help for improved communication and conversation.
I'd add one, this may be obvious, but I think it's worth saying. If you're meeting with a group and it's a large group or any kind of group and you're a little anxious, I would avoid the impulse to use humor. All the more so when I'm dealing with a really tricky topic. People are going to take it different ways. It's very likely to backfire on you. If people are coming in on a charged topic, they might not even appreciate your attempt at humor. So I would not use that. And along the same lines, I mean, I sometimes say, look, my job here is to be boring, frankly, and kind of the lead for the values here, right? My job is not to entertain. My job is not to keep things flowing as if it's a social situation. And along the same lines, and this is a lesson I use from the classroom because I facilitate conversations as an English professor. It's how we do a lot of our teaching. I have to be comfortable with silence. If I'm not leaving big gaps of silence after I raise an issue or ask a question, I may be shutting people down who are going to take a little while to formulate thoughts. And I think if I'm with a really big group, I have to trust that the people there are interested in the topic and that they might get rolling. If they never get rolling, that's okay. Maybe that's what was required. If you're going to have 50, 75, 125 people in a conversation, it's not going to flow like a 4-person, round the table kind of thing. That's okay. So at the risk of going a slightly different direction, that's what I would say is be comfortable with silence, let it happen. I love what Angela said about some advanced prep.
And honestly, I feel like Angela and Norman hit it right on the head in terms of what the expectation should be. I love agendas before meetings, whether it's a 4-person meeting or a 60-person meeting. So what the charge is, what the expectations are. So I think that really helps to drive those conversations too.
Okay, ready for the next question? On the topic of setting an agenda, there's another question to continue that line of thinking. Our listener writes that it seems unclear what the goals of the listening sessions are for those of us who have never participated in them before. So the question is, what are appropriate objectives for these types of conversations? And can you give some examples?
At the risk, I'll just jump in. I think that's a great question. I used the example earlier of a time I was hosting a series of conversations around gender parity. And there, the goal in part was to define the problem, but also to raise awareness of the problem. And that raising awareness piece is that can be amorphous, right? We want people in that situation. I needed some of the folks on the Mansfield campus to know how other folks felt because they weren't unaware, and so we needed to share. And it didn't mean we were necessarily going to solve all those problems right there. Or sometimes we need to brainstorm exactly what are some of the action steps that we could take, and they might be very different. You know, we on our campus ended up restructuring our faculty committee structure in part in order to address gender parity. But then there were other more amorphous issues that, you know, that kind of clear solution wasn't going to work. So I guess one thing I would add here is that if you're going to have a genuine conversation about a really thorny issue, you've got to be ready to adjust your plans for how it's going to go. You've got to really listen and be willing to change it up. And at the risk of talking too much, now I'm going to also say an example of changing my plans is that I've had conversations about gender parity with larger groups where then some of my colleagues, my women colleagues, came to me and said, look, I am so tired of having these conversations, and I keep feeling like I'm looked to in the room to defend, you know, the fact that there are these problems. Why is this taking my valuable time to keep having these conversations? So I took that, I took it as criticism of how I was running it, and great criticism because it was really helpful to me. And I said, okay, it's time for us to pivot. I'm going to meet with the men, and I'm going to take responsibility for letting them know what I'm hearing from their colleagues, because, you know, it's not fair to put that burden on people who are already feeling like they're not getting a fair shake or fair treatment. So I bring that example up to say, if you're really in it, you're really listening, your objectives and goals for the meetings may change. And I think that's absolutely appropriate for these really kind of difficult problems.
I want to add to that, Norman. I think that when you're looking at setting an agenda, you want to think about what's the problem that you're trying to solve. What do you want to accomplish at that encounter? Maybe your agenda is as simple as welcome, an open forum, and next steps. And leaving it really loose and flexible like that will allow you to do, just as Norman said, have the ability to pivot within the conversation because you didn't have a strict structure of an agenda. But for those like Christina who really like to have an agenda, you will please those individuals, but you've provided the flexibility that everyone perhaps will appreciate. And maybe as you continue to have more and more sessions on conversations, you can refine your agenda based upon what your participants are wanting to hear or talk more about or perceived needs that you're picking up on through the conversations.
Christina?
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that too is really, you know, what's the purpose of the meeting? Is it that you are talking through a scenario that you're ending with action items and you're ending to try to solve the problem? Is it an open forum where you're just having the conversation with the participants to see how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what this means to them? And it really is just more of that where you as a facilitator are listening and trying to help give resources and guidance and some suggestions, or is it that more action item where you're ending it with these are the takeaways, these are the charges, and we're coming back? So I think that really helps to determine, you know, what the agenda might look like, what the takeaways might look like, and what the planning looks like too.
Great.
Great, thank you. Next question is, I heard a speaker in a previous meeting this month discussing that some conversations will by necessity make people uncomfortable. Can you talk about a definition of, quote, safe that doesn't avoid still having a real conversation that struggles with a topic?
So for me, you know, thinking about what safe means is that this is an open forum to talk about the issues that you're facing or how you're feeling. There isn't supposed to be judgment here. No one's passing judgment on you either way of, you know, what your viewpoints or your experiences might be that you're sharing. And, you know, once someone starts to feel uncomfortable, if that comes up, then we have to dig into what made you feel uncomfortable. Were you uncomfortable because this is a difficult conversation and an uncomfortable conversation to even be having? Or did you feel uncomfortable because of something that was said that you may not agree with? So it's tricky in terms of, you know, how do you really balance that? Because if we're going to be having these types of conversations and we're going to be wanting, you know, our staff, our faculty, and our students to be open and honest about their experiences and how they're feeling, we do want to stress that this is a situation, or this is an area where you're not going to be judged. We're not here to judge people. And we really want people to be honest about what they are experiencing and how they're feeling.
I would agree with that. I think it's a matter of just acknowledging that some conversations are going to be hard and maybe uncomfortable, and encouraging people to think about the points that individuals are trying to make, and recognize that people don't always say it the right way. It may not always come out the right way, but really thinking about the intention of what people were trying to convey. It is difficult, and I think you have to continue to say that. This is a hard conversation. We're all learning. As the facilitator, be open to be vulnerable yourself and share misses that you've had or learning opportunities, so that others understand that, well, you're the facilitator and you've messed up sometimes with this topic. And so it helps people to feel comfortable with, they might mess up too, and that is okay.
I think those are both fantastic answers and really wise. I see safety as kind of in HR terms, as I'm here to support my employees, right? Safety should mean that they're not going to be singled out or retaliated against in the workplace. Any of those kinds of things that would impede their ability to do their job. It does not mean that it's a tough topic, so you might feel uncomfortable in a general way like that. That's not, we don't guarantee anybody that in our jobs, at least not that I'm aware of. But I think, Angela, the note you just hit is so important in talking about really difficult societal issues around gender, race, those kinds of things. Folks will say things the wrong way. And sometimes, as in the example I gave a couple of minutes ago, I might, frankly, protect some of the folks I serve by saying, let's meet in a small group and talk to some folks who may say things in ways that I may need to work with them and say, hey, that's not the way I think would be most productive to talk about that. And sometimes there are folks I'll meet with one-on-one just for that reason, because they need to feel that they're able to speak their minds about what's going on, but I know, and they know, they're going to say it in a way that is likely to be offensive to somebody else. And if I'm creating a safe space there, it's not because I don't want anybody to be offended. It's because it's unnecessary, right? Like, I don't think it'll be as productive as if I meet with that person individually or in a small group, so that we can just address that in a way that doesn't feel as charged. I know a dietitian I respect tremendously, who's become a leader in higher education, who said to me that her part of her leadership philosophy is, you have got to meet people where they are and figure out what's actually going on in order to help them move forward, because her experience as a dietitian taught her that, if you don't really know how somebody's eating and their relationship with food, what it really is, the nitty gritty, and all the unvarnished truth, you're never going to be able to really move them forward. So sometimes I'll create some spaces, whether it's a one-on-one or a small group, so that we can really have that conversation. And I can be the one, because it's a little less charged for me, to say, hey, that term is out of date now. We don't use that term, or this is a different, here's a more productive way to talk about this. Here's the common value that you do have with these people you think you disagree with. Anyway, that has been helpful for me.
I think maybe we could have time for one more question this morning. Leo or Lori?
Okay, so we actually only have 2 questions left, and they're kind of similar, so I can combine them if you would like me to do that, or we can do one at a time. how about I combine them? So one is, how do you get people who really need to have this conversation into the room rather than having a meeting where we are preaching to the choir? And then the next question, which kind of is related, is if your dialogue is one that may help the wider community, what are ways to select and invite audiences? So I think the common theme is, how do you get people in the room who will benefit from being there? Beyond people who are coming because they agree with having the dialogue, and getting people in who may not know that this is happening, but who might like to know from the wider community.
I think from a leadership standpoint, I think there's a huge opportunity there. And so I think if your dean, for example, sets a standard of this is the expectation of everyone in the college and this is what we're going to do, I think you're going to have the natural buy-in that you should have. And if not, then I think there are other ways to go about addressing that. I think to Norman's point, I think there's opportunities to engage separately with some individuals who perhaps simply need to have that one-on-one conversation. If it's just a few, that can be really easily managed by meeting with just a few people. I do think that if you're looking at trying to engage the broader community, you need to be thoughtful around who the presenter actually is. Is it someone that people are likely to know and is really well respected in the area that you're going to have the discussion on? Or is it someone that's new? If it's someone that's new, is there an opportunity to have a new speaker join someone who's really experienced to give them some exposure while having a name on the flyer that people are going to recognize and want to come to?
I love those answers, Angela. I think that's really wise. I will say on that last note, if I'm going to require something of everybody, it's got to be good, because I don't have that many chips to play. So if I've played my chip on something, here we're required to do this thing and it's not very good, I've lost a lot right there. So it has to be good. If it's not that kind of situation and I want to have a softer approach, I do one of two things, and one is what Angela described about reaching out to people individually. And it might be that I take attendance, even on the QT, privately, about who's coming to some of the meetings. And the folks who aren't coming, I can reach out to and say, hey, I noticed you weren't at this meeting. Could we just get together and talk? I'll do that. Or if I want to have a kind of required event that I don't want to say that it's required, and maybe I'm revealing too much here, being too candid, I'll make it a part of an event that's already required. So we have a kind of meeting on my campus, faculty assembly, where all tenure track faculty are required to be. I've made some issues part of those meetings because I know everyone's required to be there, and I'm not playing a chip, if I use that metaphor of saying, hey, you must come talk about this topic. I said, we're just going to fold this into one of our regularly required meetings. So I think variety of approaches has helped me.
And Angela, gave the example that I would give is, having, like I mentioned before, if you see someone who is, when you're having those conversations, either really emotional, really triggered, you see the impact on them, having a separate meeting with them. On the flip side, if you see someone who you feel as a leader could really benefit from some of these dialogues or conversations, going, planning a meeting with them, talking to them one-on-one, or even in a small group setting, like Angela mentioned, is something that is what I would recommend and would be the steps that I would take.
Yeah, I really love all of those answers. Thank you all so very much. And we're getting close to time. So, I just want to thank you all, Angela, Christina, Norman, on behalf of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Facilitators Group. This has been a really great conversation and a really important one. To your point, these conversations aren't going away. And so the more that we can prepare ourselves and sort of lean into being ready for these conversations, some of them are planned and some of them aren't. And I think we have to be ready for both, and just to be impactful and intentional. So thank you all so very much. And thank you to those participants who are with us this morning. As a reminder, this was recorded and session 1 was recorded as well. So we will send out links and information on the recordings as well as a resource guide to our participants as well. So again, thank you all very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.